Okay, we're going to a controversial topic today, and it really violates all the social advice that we get in the United States, anyway, about avoiding politics, religion, and some other controversial topics when you're talking to people socially. But this is not a social conversation. This is one on one with you. And I want to address abortion today because it is a politically charged issue in the United States, and those who favor it, namely the Democratic Party, have structured their argument on the basis that it is a woman's right, and really only a woman's right, to decide whether or not to have an abortion, and no one else should have a voice in that. That's an appealing argument, and it's working at the ballot box. Elections are being won based on this argument. Those who oppose abortion are branded as being anti-women's rights, and again, that is a important topic to people. No one wants the government interfering in our lives any more than it has to, and so again, it's a compelling argument. I want to set that aside for a minute to suggest to both men and women that there are other things to keep in mind when we consider not just that argument, but the topic of abortion in general. Some of this, I hope most of this, you haven't heard before or thought about. It's my aim to bring up some new topics related to this, some new ideas that might influence decision making. First, let's talk about men, politicians, male and female, but a lot of men, and men in general, who support abortion. Um, they really have a very good position in terms of uh, winning the favor of women who agree with them. I mean, men can't get pregnant, but how gracious of them to support my right, if I'm a woman, to choose. Um, Let me give you a reason to consider beyond that possible conclusion that you might draw. Why else might a man favor abortion? Well, if a man is of a mind to have his way with women uh, in a consensual situation or a borderline abusive one, I'm staying clear of rape for the moment, which is obviously exploitative, wrong, and horribly damaging to women. But short of that, men, the risk of them, to them, in that encounter is quite a bit less than the risk to the woman in that encounter. Men cannot get pregnant, obviously, and a woman can. So it's very easy for a man to assume whatever risk there is in a pregnancy where, excuse me, in a relationship where pregnancy is not the goal, because he's not going to get pregnant anyway. She is. Um, and if she does, and he doesn't want to assume the responsibilities of fatherhood, his having supported the idea of abortion makes it all the more convenient for him. After all, he's supporting her, and he's not going to get the abortion. This is an important point. Biologically, if we're looking for equity in sexual relations, there really isn't any. Men almost always assume a far less risk of almost every adverse outcome from relationships of this type, intimacy, than a woman does. That includes many, if not most, sexually transmitted infections, and of course the single greatest risk of intimacy, which is pregnancy. So, man's not going to get pregnant. Can't. Biologically impossible, regardless of what we call him. Not going to get pregnant. Women can. They therefore assume the lion's share of the risk of that relationship. If an abortion is to follow, she's the one who's going to have to get it, not him. So again, the cost, the risk, the toxicity of medication that might be used, all of that is going to be assumed universally by the woman. You can say until the cows come home how unfair that is, but it's simply a fact. So a man supporting abortion does so with a different set of risks than the woman who does the same. From her standpoint, and again, keeping as a basis for this the political emphasis that this is about women's rights. A woman should not have to assume a pregnancy she doesn't want. I fully agree with that. Unwanted advances should always be under the control of women. They should be able to say no when they mean it. Understanding the affront on their dignity as well as their health, keeping in mind what I just said about the uneven risk involved in relationships of this type. So a woman is always going to assume a greater risk, and she therefore ought to have the right to say no when she means no. Plus, almost always, women are physically weaker than men. Men, therefore, have the capacity to control or dominate women, which I absolutely oppose. It's wrong under any circumstances. And to women who really don't want that, they ought to have the full protections of law in every circumstance to oppose and deal legally with unwanted advances. So that's my opinion of that. That's where our political capital ought to be spent. Because human reproduction is as inefficient as it is, on the order of 20% of would-be pregnancies are spontaneously aborted, most often before anybody knows what happened. I personally favor what we in this country refer to as a morning after pill and ready access to that in the event of something improper that's led to a pregnancy that someone doesn't want. If you get that on board very quickly, we need not know whether or not that incident would have led to pregnancy. To me, that is both an ethical and a moral and a conscientious or conscious remedy to whatever other concerns people might have of ending a pregnancy, in this case, that likely or maybe didn't happen at all. I think that's the we handle that in this country. But in the meantime, women who are falling for the political argument that politicians are on their side because, after all, this is a women's right issue, are forgetting that they are becoming new targets of exploitation when too much is invested in that argument. Again, men can't get pregnant, so supporting abortion is very easy for us if we have a mind to, because, after all, we become heroes by supporting a woman's right to choose without having to suffer any of the consequences of the sexual act in the first place. That, to me, is an important point to keep in mind. Plus, there is an assault on women in general in the United States for wanting to be women. The notion that equal rights mean essentially equaling the biological distinctions between men and women is absurd. And it simply can't be fixed or changed by will or by law. And yet those extremists in both genders, both male and female, who suggest otherwise, are in a sense undermining women who enjoy being women, who want to be appreciated as women with all that goes with it, both positive and different. I'm not going to say negative, because I personally don't think, because I'm a champion of the human race for one thing, that I would want women to be categorically unable to become pregnant. They will always have that capacity biologically. Whether they elect to exercise it is up to them, of course, and should be. But I would celebrate the distinction between men and women on many levels, including this one, and just invite those who are very polarized or very committed to the idea that abortion on demand is automatically and always a good thing, to consider the fact that they are subject to being exploited by those who are using their argument to win the political support of women who will never in their life want or need or even think about an abortion because their lives haven't taken them in that direction. They enjoy, perhaps not every minute of it, being pregnant, and they enjoy being mothers when that opportunity comes, so that they, in partnership with the man who hopefully loves them and has used that moment of conception as a way of cementing that love, in partnership with God for bringing new life into the world, that's the ideal. Short of that ideal, I understand there are problems, and I appeal again to men to respect women by respecting themselves, understanding that they're too good to treat another human being, most especially a woman who they're probably or at least possibly capable of physically dominating, doing that. It's certainly tragic, catastrophic even to her, and it damages you, the man, as well. Think too much of yourselves to do that. And women, think too much of yourselves to be exploited by the argument that your rights trump moral and ethical propriety, some of which is being used against you by this somewhat false or at least misleading argument. There, I said it. I hope you don't see this as a political discussion. I hope it just simply gives you another perspective that you will very seriously consider. Be your own thinker. Don't let politicians steer you into an argument that sounds appealing until you think it through completely. That's my hope and my prayer.